so-called leaders prostituted us to the West, destroyed our culture.
Oh God, my brains.
Back in the early 2000s, there was an absolute fascination with World War II. Desperate to relive the action and adventure of Saving Private Ryan, Band of Brothers, and strategy games like Company of Heroes. On one fateful day, also known as the 5th of November 2007, Activision decided to stop applying cocaine to Bobby Kotick's genitals and release a video game that many would say was revolutionary. Others would say it is the same game we already played, but with a new, more modern colour scheme, which apparently is more and more grey and brown in the palette. The game was released for PC, Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 and helped really popularise the Call of Duty multiplayer experience that we now know and... well, is love the word we would use? I mean, I'll probably tell you later on, but it seems very strong. The game was so popular that it got a remaster almost exactly 9 years later, which was seemingly trying to cash in on that whole thing that 343 did with Halo 2, except it didn't really keep it up, and we are about 7 years overdue for a Halo 3 remaster. Actually, to be fair, if they did the Halo 2 thing with this year, we'd actually be getting Halo 2 remastered. Anyway, this remastered copy will be what I'm using for this review. This is for many reasons, mainly because it looks nicer, it was able to be installed easier on my Xbox, and it was paired with Infinite Warfare, a game that I purchased and I am sure I will cover eventually. Starting up the campaign, we open on the SAS training compound in Creedon Hill, Herefordshire, in the UK, which you can look up on Google Maps. It's next to a lovely little village that must be petrified every time a training drill occurs, especially the school. Damn, can you imagine you go out to play tag on the playground and you just hear hand grenades and assault weapons for a constant half hour? And then, like, every school year there's at least one military funeral a little way up the road? That sounds depressing. Anyway, we take control of Sergeant John Soap McTavish, a Scottish 3rd Battalion Parachute Regiment soldier who apparently did a tour in Northern Ireland, and so probably did just some good old-fashioned British war crimes, because Soap took part in Operation Banner, which, according to the Malcolm Sutton Index of Deaths from Conflict in Ireland and the Conflict Archive on the internet, which is surveyed to have had about between 156 and 160 innocent civilians killed in this conflict. Of them, 61 were children. With that in mind, only 4 soldiers faced any kind of criminal charges, only serving 2 to 3 years of their life sentences, and were allowed to re-enlist when they got out. The army lobbied for many to be given immunity. So, we're already starting with a war criminal and the game has only been running for 5 minutes maximum. We start and chat to Gaz, played by Craig Fairbrass, who is also known as the live-action One Piece Chef Zeth, a repeat actor in this game series as Ghost in Modern Warfare 2 and Walcroft in Modern Warfare 3. Also featuring in a number of British-based movies and shows, including having a role in both EastEnders and The Bill. Following the great chef's instructions, we pick up some guns and do some shooting. And that's when Gaz says something unfortunate.
Your fruit-killing skills are remarkable.
So we know where Gaz sits on Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Soap is then sent off to the next part of the training, the CQB test, to prepare for the assault on a cargo ship. It's home to a number of Captain Price's best, most memeable lines from this series.
What the hell kind of name is Soap, eh? How'd a muppet like you pass selection?
Flashbang through the door!
And while I run the course, I'll mention that this mission had more to it originally, and had some of this content that can be found on the DS version, namely the obstacle course and grenade drills, which are led by Mac and Sergeant Newcastle, who I couldn't find anything for the voice actor on, and would love to know more. So if you know anything, please do drop it in the comments. I actually really want to know who this person is. These parts of the training are playable as an optional extra in the remastered version, something I was unaware of when doing the initial recording of my playthrough, so I will be borrowing some footage to cover. Don't worry, H-Bomber Guy, I will be noting who they are. Soap gets to practice throwing some grenades, firing a grenade launcher, and blowing up Sergeant Newcastle's ex-wife's car with C4. Soap is then sent to the obstacle course, where Mac, played by Gideon Emery, who is known for roles like Gideon in Advanced Warfare, Fergus in the new Wolfenstein trilogy, and Blofeld in GoldenEye Rogue Agent, makes an unfortunate and misogynistic quip to the newbies, setting Soap off on the obstacle course. With all that covered, Soap manages to pass the CQB test and all other basic training, and he's now working under Captain John Price, someone we're going to be looking into. So he's voiced by Billy Murray, not to be confused with the guy from Groundhog Day. Billy is known for his roles like Johnny Allen in EastEnders, having a number of roles calling back to the 70s as various police officers, and honestly, if you've watched a British cop show in that time, you've probably seen Billy at least once. He also starred beside Craig Fairbrass in the Rise of the Foot Soldier movies, so it's nice to see these guys together again. Jumping straight into our next mission, we have Crew Expendable, a breach of an Estonian freighter in the Bering Strait. For those of us who don't know what that is, it's a little bit of sea that's approximately 88 kilometers wide between Russia and Alaska. Soap, Price, Gaz, Walcroft and Griffin are dropped off by Big Bird, no not that one.
Roger that, we're out of here. Base of plate, this is Big Bird. Package secure, returning to base, now.
And upon entry we get the murder of some non-combatants, as the guys are too drunk to fight and or asleep. Good job on the war crime counter. We skip ahead a little more and get a couple of alien references, the mission title and...
I'll either keep this for close encounters. Too right, mate. On my mark, go.
This is a reference to my video about how Call of Duty has the strangest history, including characters like the Xenomorph, that you can watch here. Or if I haven't added a link, I'll link it in the comments of the description. Moving through the rest of the ship, the team fight more and more to find a container with some radiation on it, and opening it up, they find a manifest, and a flag that links it to the Taliban-inspired Op-4. Now, if I was transporting things to a terrorist organization, I have to say I would not make it this obvious. This feels painful and oddly planted. If you saw this on a police or something tweet, you would just immediately think, yeah, that's just set up entirely. But Soap doesn't seem to bat an eye. He picks up the manifest that shows the connections between the Russian loyalist forces and the Op-4. There's a report of planes coming in to destroy the ship that the team are on. With the ship hit, our SAS boys have to make a daring escape. It's so desperate, Soap almost doesn't make it. But having made it out alive, Price discusses with Gaz, Soap and the rest of the SAS how the Op-4 is currently making waves in the Middle East, Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia specifically, and how the Americans might find the information of interest. The game then presents us with a new mission, where we play as President Al-Falani, and if you thought this was going to transform into a fun, Tropico-style game, you'd be dead wrong. Actually, given the mission, this wording may actually be a little in bad taste. The President is woken from what I can only assume is a bad hangover given his current dragged state, and he's put in the car and driven to the results of the new election. His driver's wearing a ski mask in Afghanistan, which seems like a dehydration nightmare, and his security detail looks suspiciously like Vladimir Mashkov's tracker, Sasha Ivanich, in the hit 2001 US Navy propaganda film Behind Enemy Lines, which just must be a coincidence and nothing too terrible at all. Al-Falani seems to have run a terrible show given all the gun violence that's going on. A lot of gangs apparently, but I hear a lot of dogs, so that may mean good things. Maybe more animal shelters. Once at the what feels very fancy courtyard, we find that the election didn't really go Al-Falani's way, but because he's so hungover and maybe a little drunk, I'd probably drink it off, to be fair. He's needed to be tied to a post to help him up, and that's great. That's great. These guys are so caring. We get to meet the other guy who was running against us, and oh, no! This wasn't an election. This was a violent coup that ended in the execution live on TV. That's crazy. I couldn't have guessed that. Yeah, okay, this was all a joke. I just wanted to talk about this game differently due to the fact that this scene is good at providing tone to this game and looking at how the story could be talking about bleak things. But I just have one issue. What did Al-Falani's presidency look like? Because we see throughout the game how the Up4 handle things. The Call of Duty wiki describes it like this.
It is implied by al-Assad that Al-Falani has been a leader of a revolution against the previous monarchic government, but that he has been colluding with the West in opposition of the goals set by the revolution, but whose claims can also be seen as possible political rhetoric and propaganda, given that these statements were unverifiable.
So the problem of Al-Falani is that he helped overthrow an oppressive power structure, and how did he repay the people? Oh, he just lived in luxury when they didn't, and allowed the Western powers free reign over the country. So he became what we like to call a puppet or client head of state, like that of South Vietnam in the 50s and through to the 70s. And a number of other countries suggested in the modern age to the US and the UK. Which is a really odd thing to do. Very bad optics, really. I also want to talk about the drive here. It is used to highlight what I can only call the cartoonishly evil actions that allegedly occurred by the Taliban in Afghanistan. Something I only word like this because of how much has come out in the actual events this game is based on that makes you doubt so much of what we're told in the West. This is also not the biggest surprise, given that al-Assad is designed like depictions of Saddam Hussein, who we will be seeing more and more allusions to throughout the story. Now, at this point, I cannot think of another worthwhile spoiler warning, so if you don't want spoilers to a game that has almost had its remake out for a decade, jump to the time on screen. It also means that you'll probably dodge more rants about how these people are all war crimes and how they all deserve the chair. Or me getting, as the gamers would say, too political. For those of us still here, we enter what is technically the fourth mission. Blackout. One day after the execution of Al-Falani, our SAS boys have to go in and rescue the guy who gave them the intel on the cargo ship. His name is Nikolai, who has been captured by ultranationalist forces. If you want to know what an ultranationalist is, think how the MAGA, Britain First, Putin's military groups, those kind of movements work. It is all about the country no matter what, and everyone else can be burned to the ground. It's just a hyper right-wing ideal, not like the idea of British jobs, because there is a level of nationalism that can work for a government in a way that doesn't become toxic. This is an obsession with that ideal. After sneaking through some swamps, shooting a couple of guys and setting some bombs, Price, Gaz and Soap, or as I'm going to start calling them, Team Brit, meet with Sergeant Kamarov, the leader of the local loyalist forces, to launch a counter to the ultranationalist forces. Kamarov is played by Christoph Conrad, who you may know for his breakout role as Russian pilot from Independence Day. He was Yuri in the 2008 movie Hotel California. He is also Vladimir in the Tomb Raider reboot from 2013. And he was also Dmitry Ustinov in the star-studded Red Sparrow. Kamarov and Price seem to go way back, including an incident in Beirut sometime prior, something that is never explained in this version or the reboot. I should also talk about who the loyalists are at this point in time, as obviously this will help us know who all the players are. The loyalists are a group who sided with the Russian federal government, which basically means they are the more open to capitalism one after the fall of the USSR. This would not make them anti-communists, however, and it would also not make the ultranationalists communists either. This is something that does spark confusion when you see the logos used in multiplayer, or when the loyalists use Ushanka hats with the hammer and sickle on them. The loyalists are described as follows.
A democratic governing political party and national army, until their defeat by the ultranationalists, later returned in late 2016 as a coalition government with President Vorshevsky.
With that in mind, we follow the group as Team Brit and Kamarov assist the loyalists in their pushback, and I learned in my research for this script that there was originally a plan to play as a loyalist soldier, and it would have had 2 missions, I can only imagine, that would have taken around here, and then one in a later chapter where the loyalists would come to aid Team Brits in their dire need of rescue, and this could be the signifying of paying Kamarov's debt. This is something I really wish they had kept in, and we would have been able to have had an interesting fight alongside Soap this early in the game, and would have given us an idea of what he looks like, how he acts, how he sounds, and making it feel like these events take place in a living world, a bit more than I am a mind floating through the bodies of people in a simulation, if you understand what I mean. Kinda like Fallout 3 had Operation Anchorage and Tranquility Lane. After a bit of sniping and fighting some more of the ultranationalists on the cliffsides, Price and Gaz have become sick to death of supporting anyone else and potentially sorting out a mutual goal. They need to go after their boy, so they give Kamarov a bit of a talking to and a bit of a punch up. Kamarov tells them where Nikolai is, and it turns out he's in a house on the other side of this little village the loyalists are fighting for. Bearing in mind, they were gonna reach him anyway. It was gonna potentially take a teensy bit longer, but it was gonna happen. I want to say as well, this action is just shockingly narcissistic and weirdly Western-centric of the Team Brit boys. There's a conflict in an Eastern nation that does come to affect the entire group, but they want to do their job and nothing more. It makes the idea of Kamarov being the darling he is in the rest of the series, not just in this title, seem a devastating choice. I mean, I wouldn't rescue Price nearly as much as Kamarov does after this. Clearly, Beirut was a big deal. Would have been nice to see it. Small side note as well, the real world idea of this would happen only a year later with the Russian invasion of Georgia, the country, not the American state. It's not all about you Americans. And a summary of those events would go as follows.
Some Russian troops had illicitly crossed the Georgia-Russia border through the Roki Tunnel and advanced into the South Ossetian conflict zone by the 7th of August, before the Georgian military response. Russia falsely accused Georgia of committing genocide and aggression against South Ossetia, and launched a full-scale land, air and sea invasion of Georgia on the 8th of August, referring to it as a peace enforcement operation. Russian and South Ossetian forces fought Georgian forces in and around South Ossetia for several days, until Georgian forces retreated. The Russian Air Force attacked targets both within and beyond the conflict zone. An information war was also waged during and after the conflict. Nicolas Sarkozy, the president of France at the time, personally negotiated a ceasefire agreement on the 12th of August. Russia recognized the independence of Abkhazia and South Ossetia from Georgia on the 26th of August, and the Georgian government severed diplomatic relations with Russia. Russia mostly completed its withdrawal of troops from undisputed parts of Georgia on the 8th of October. In 2021, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that Russia maintained direct control over the separatist regions and was responsible for grave human rights abuses taking place there. In 2022, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for 3 Russian nationals due to war crimes against ethnic Georgians during the conflict.
These are events that the Western world really did nothing about and pretended weren't an issue, even though it was so broadly covered. It was on Mock the Week Season 8.
If the Russians say they will withdraw today, when will they actually withdraw?
And then we have, 14 years later, on 24th of February 2022, an invasion of Ukraine by Russia as part of their escalation of a war they started in 2014. So, literally the Western powers ignored this issue we are hearing about incredibly frequently, or at least were until they got bored on 2 occasions before it got to level really bad time, according to them. Just something for us to remember after we get propagandized that all these people and countries are the good guys and everything they represent will always be a positive. Team Brit make their way back through the village and reach the house that their buddy Nicky is in. Gaz nips round the back to cut off the power, and we get to see a weird comparison in the payroll of these 2 military forces as Team Brit use night vision and silencers, taking people out who are feeling as effective as if they were trying to fight a ghost. They eventually reach their boy Nicky and exfiltrate, and leave the Russian Civil War to chug along because we don't care. However, the house infiltration part of the mission, I have a couple of little questions. Price makes the comment that
These night vision goggles make it too easy.
yeah, it does, Price. You're barely playing the same type of conflict all of a sudden. If you found a bunch of enemies, blinded and deafened them in their sleep, and then the next day challenged them to a fight, it would be a little unfair. My second gripe is, how does Nikolai see when you help him up? I mean, he has no night vision, no torch, and somehow walks out like nothing's the matter. My third and final one is, why is the SAS helicopter that picks the team up American in their voices? Especially with the Call of Duty wiki saying that the models are Russian loyalists, and when they show up later, they are randomly generated SAS troops. This is like some kind of insane conspiracy. What the hell is going on here? Before I sit and think about this far too long, we are launched the length of a 34-hour car journey to Khafji, Saudi Arabia. And we are placed in a Black Hawk helicopter in the shoes of United States Marine Sergeant Paul Jackson, witnessing a scene that is so good and epic that Sledgehammer Games and Infinity Ward would go on to plagiarize it from themselves in Modern Warfare 3. Under the command of Lieutenant Vasquez, played by David Sobolov, who is possibly best known as most animated depictions of Drac the Destroyer in Disney Infinity, Avengers Academy, Lego Marvel's superheroes short The Thanos Threat, as well as other roles like RoboCop in the series Alpha Commando and Tyson Rios in Army of Two. The squad, or Team Yankee as I will be calling them, pile up on the reported HQ building, breach the door, and neutralize all threats within. After discovering that Al-Assad is not amongst those in the building and looking at what they might want to steal from the piles of weapons, there is a report received by Vasquez that Al-Assad and his forces have taken up the nearby television station as their residence. The command is made to move on the new position, supported by fighter jets and Black Hawks, while going up against, at maximum, a Toyota Hilux with a machine gun from World War II hot glued gunned onto it. Team Yankee charged through the television station, taking no prisoners and reconvening with Staff Sergeant Griggs. Griggs is voiced by Mark Grigsby, who is now the head of Infinity Ward, who primarily worked on the animation department and has no other acting credits. You can find him on Twitter at @GorgeGriggs. Hopefully I've said that correctly. I do have to say something that I see as weirdly suspect in this, that the most prevalent hero character of colour in the game was not given an actual voice actor. This is not to speak ill of Grigsby's performance, actually. He did a fantastic job and would like to see more of his work. But I have to ask why specifically this character is treated this way. Following Griggs to the rest of his team, Jackson is afforded the opportunity to help defend the TV station from OP4 reinforcements with a sniper rifle. An activity that feels more like shooting fish in a barrel, which is kind of depressing, or feels a little like brutality. It's not even necessary. I mean, you can just walk past it and carry on like nothing happened, like I did for years and years, but if you do, it weighs a bit weirdly. Team Yankee then moves through the studio, prepared to take down Al-Assad, and oops, he's not here. And I guess we have to find out where to go next. So, 14 hours later, Jackson is set to support a stuck-in-the-mud tank known as Warpig. Moving from their starting position, and that sounds like they're a dance troupe, the squad are ambushed by the OP4 troops and fighting in the dark. A fight where the night vision goggles used by Marines are an absolute must breaks out, and during the fight I need to ask the question of how are the native fighters able to fight here? I mean, they can't see anything. How are they managing this? Are we learning that in this universe, people born in the Middle East or the eastern hemisphere of the globe have increased adaptation of their corneas? However, I also have to ask a couple of questions in regards to Paul Jackson's starting weapons. In Charlie Don't Surf, he's wielding an M4A1 with a reflex sight and a laser sight. We then move to the Bog, and that same M4A1 now has a holographic sight and an M203 grenade launcher attached. What time did we have to change this out? Also, we're just a sergeant. Why are we getting change in the gear all the time? Constantly being allowed to customize our equipment. Moving on from this reflection of the game being some kind of military-industrial complex wet dream, and moving through the building, Paulie Boy has to fight off more natives and use an FMG 148 Javelin from the not even cold dead hands of Private West to take out some upcoming tanks. According to the game's figures and logic, taking out the 4 of them would end up costing $352,000 at the time of the game's creation in military ordnance on the Americans' behalf, which, if we adjust for inflation, we have about 5 minutes of combat that has cost at least $568,123.59 at the time of writing. Just wanted to remind you that's how the military-industrial complex spends your money. With the spend of essentially 5 prime apartments in the centre of Greater Manchester out the way, or one party in Activision's Cosby Suite, Team Yankee reaches the Bog and have to secure the area, taking out some anti-air guns and allowing for engineers to be dropped off to help support Warpig. There's nothing majorly interesting that occurs here. You get to call in a high-powered firing round on what is essentially a 2-story apartment building, and nothing else. It's basically a short exercise in excessive force. We jump back in time to our next mission and make it back to Russia with Team Brit as their helicopter Hammer 26 is shot down by a Stinger missile. Upon hitting the ground, the 2 pilots and SAS operative Paulson are killed, with Soap, Price, Gaz and Nikolai to gather whatever equipment they can and move out before being caught by the ultranationalists, pilfering the corpses of their recently deceased comrades. Having moved through the nearby town and avoiding capture, Team Brit arrive at a farm, where the player can decide to save the life of a local farmer, which is a lovely little touch, and can make a potentially warming side to Soap and the rest. We skip ahead a little further where Team Brit are spotted by the helicopter that has been on their tail the whole time, and they smash their way into a barn, grabbing a Stinger missile to take down the heli. On the way out of the barn, there was an ambush waiting for our boys on the ground, which would be absolutely decimated by an incoming AC-130, which leads directly into our next mission. Switching control to the thermal imaging TV operator of USAF AC-130H Warhammer, following and providing air support to Price's squad as they cross the Russian countryside on foot, in vehicles, and in an air extraction. As you fight off the ultranationalists from harming our ground team, you have the choice of fire between 25mm rounds, which would be 2.5 centimeters wide, 40mm rounds, which are about 4 centimeters wide, and 105mm or 10.5 centimeters wide, making their respective damage on the human body.
1, 2, 3, fire in the hole!
This is a mission that has become such a trope for mid-2000s military propaganda that it does not even finish with video games. Movies have followed this practice and given the aerial payload demolition team shot. Be it Mark Wahlberg's Lone Survivor, Halo 4 in the level Reclaimer, Guy Ritchie's The Covenant, 2022's Modern Warfare 2, 2011's Modern Warfare 3, and honestly so many more that I cannot remember off the top of my head. If you think of any others, drop them in the comments. It was a really big deal between 2008 and 2013, but it seems to be coming back around. Getting back on track, while you decimate the population of a small town in Russia with an arsenal and bombardments that would be seen as overkill by the damned Covenant, your little buddies in this death machine chuckle away like they're watching the funniest thing in the world to them, which I'm going to assume is a Cartman edgy jokes compilation mixed with every rape joke in Family Guy. Having led the Teen Brit boys on the ground to their exfiltration point with mixed levels of description, which can cause the player to accidentally hit a civilian or something and get openly castrated by the game. A feature that is beyond irritating when, like I said, you're firing an obscene bombardment with rounds that would flatten a house with minimal effort, and a blast radius that can quite easily hit non-deliberate targets. This should be seen as an indictment of the military uses of these armaments, where it is sometimes hard to avoid civilian targets in a video game, where this is made a massive amount easier as it's programmed to do so. So how much more likely is it in a real situation where people don't work like programmed NPCs, and well, it's not like the military could ever do something badly and accidentally harm a civilian? Oh. Hang on. Moving on from our criticism of the actual US Army, we are jumping back to the Yanks and Paulie Boy Jackson, where our tank war pig is up and running, and we're pushing forward through the enemy forces as we attempt to bring in Al-Assad. This mission features a lot of battling through houses. Verticality plays a large role, but mainly it's fighting in a straight line through the multiplayer map Crossfire. The most interesting choice in this mission is where the Yanks push a dumpster forward as a means of cover and makes it for an interesting set of animations while also playing to a sense of sort of realism. The Yanks take out a tank and massively overpower the Op-4, as I covered in my timeline video. There's not much of note to talk about here. If you like the content of your typical Call of Duty affair, this is it. We jump ahead to our next mission. Team Yank are exfiltrated and are now hot on the tail of Al-Assad, who apparently has a warhead. Something that, if you are old enough to remember the early to mid 2000s, is exactly the reason for the invasion of Iraq. The reason of overthrowing Saddam Hussein, the fear-mongering about Iran, North Korea, and so many others. Now we are launching an attack on Basra, Iraq itself, starting on a 40mm cannon, just firing indiscriminately to soften resistance. Then you help a bunch of people get their asses out of there, first being a recon team, the second being a crashed pilot who has been assisting you throughout this assault, and Paul has to princess carry her from the cockpit to the helicopter. Once you have Deadly's pilot, Pelio, in your helicopter, maybe even giving Volker a high five on the way in. The squad dust off and try to escape the confirmed WMD, and unfortunately, there just isn't time. The EMP blast shorts out your helicopter's engines. Volker is thrown clear of the chopper while still, at the very least, hundreds of feet up in the air. The chopper goes down, and Jackson is knocked out and rises sometime later. Crawling out of the remnants of the wreckage, and depending on which version of the game you play, you will or will not see a Marine staggering around. And you will in either version be able to hear the haunting, ghostly laughter of children from the playground. Seeing the mushroom cloud and being consumed by the horror of this event is an iconic part of this game, making it a memorable part of pop culture in my eyes. I have to critique this presentation, however. This mission has become famous, and its monumental spectacle of how games could do storytelling at this time, at least in what was expected by a first-person shooter, a genre that was started with Doom and Wolfenstein, and was only a couple of years prior mainly about World War II games and Star Wars and other licensed titles, as far as their main popularity goes at the very least. This is a propaganda piece, and I know it is. I just need to give it the dues to the creators of making this a movie-esque propaganda piece, making a nuclear detonation scene that hits harder than even games like Fallout 4 that would come out a decade later.
Oh my god!
This level is designed to speak to the people who were hearing at the same time that Saddam Hussein would have done exactly this if we hadn't stopped him. It's fluff to say that America's occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan is a good thing and should have been continued, if anything, because look at what could have happened. Something, let's get revenge for 9/11. With the blood pumping, the confirmation of so many people lost, and a need for revenge pulsing through our veins, we reach the end of Act 1. The longest act in this game by some margin as well. The opening of Act 2 has big shoes to fill, and we have to jump all the way back to Soap and Team Brit, who are now in Azerbaijan, loaded up with a silenced M4, grenade launcher and a shotgun. You are prepped for war, and you are moving through a town, taking down Khaled al-Assad's new friends, the Russian ultranationalists. Team Brit fight through the town, call in air support periodically, and find their way to the barn that Khaled has been couchsurfing on after the palace he was living in was invaded by the Western powers. His predecessor made all the allowances and had blown a few holes in it, and some weirdo white boy had just pinned him for an act of total war, branding Khaled a war criminal. Which, if he had been born white and supported the American war machine, he probably would have been given a movie made about him in the year 2089. In this mission, we can have a lot of issues when it comes to the helicopter support on the regular. The animation can take just enough time that it can be more dangerous than it's worth. I wanted to mention something I saw, that there is a loyalist called Dmitry Petrenko. A fun reference to Call of Duty 1 and 2, and with Captain Price being the grandson of the Captain Price from those World War II titles. Is that the same here? Well, no one knows, because Petrenko wasn't iconic enough, and then didn't become a worn-out staple of the franchise, so there was no expansion on his character and lineage. When breaching the farm, you can call in that helicopter on it, and Price will say,
"Remember, we want all Assad alive."
Ignoring the amount of firepower raining down on the whimsy wooden structure he's hiding in, making some unintentional hilarity, and I oddly love these dumb moments that you don't seem to get anymore with how rigid games can be now. To save my voice, I'm going to just insert a clip from my previous Call of Duty video at this point to just describe the terrible actions taken place by Captain Price. Price interrogates Khaled al-Assad to find out the origin of the nuclear device. Al-Assad's phone rings, and Captain Price answers it, revealing Imran Zakhaev to be behind the whole plot. Price then executes al-Assad. Small side note, the actions taken in this scene break a number of articles of the Geneva Convention and deem these actions a war crime, if not several. I will go through these in order. Article 12 shows that at this moment Khaled al-Assad is now the responsibility of the British government, as he has been detained by the SAS. Articles 13 through 16 state that a prisoner of war must be treated humanely without any adverse discrimination, and that their medical needs must be met. This is not complied with. Articles 17 through 20 dictate what information a prisoner must give: surname, first name, rank, date of birth, and army, regimental, or personal or serial number, and any interrogation methods that may be used by the detaining power. No physical or mental torture, nor any other form of coercion. These are not followed by Price, and Price kills an unarmed POW who should have been exfiltrated to the UK before questioning, while said POW is tied to a chair. This deems Captain Price a war criminal. Price also answers al-Assad's phone and learns that Imran Zakhaev is the guy working with al-Assad and the true mastermind here. Something that, I have to be honest, the literal heaps of ultranationalists outside, and the fact that you knew that Zakhaev is the head of these guys as far back as the latest of the third mission, is feeling like the SAS team apparently needed all spelling out for them, as slowly and painfully as possible. I don't think they're the elites that we've been told they are. Price then begins reminiscing for a few hours and telling the whole squad his stories of when he did some cool stuff. But we get to play it and not just listen to a sad old man talk about his glory days. Jumping back 15 years, we are now playing as Lieutenant John Price. We follow the instructions of Captain Macmillan as you dart through Pripyat, Chernobyl in Ukraine, in what will become a staple idea of the franchise, where it's two soldiers, armed only with sniper rifles, trying to take down a high-value target or get some kind of intel or something like that. It's seen in World at War, Modern Warfare 2 in 3 separate missions, Black Ops, Final Fronts. Modern Warfare 3 has 2 different ones, Black Ops 2, World War 2, Advanced Warfare, Black Ops 3, Infinite Warfare, Modern Warfare 2019, 2 in Black Ops Cold War, Vanguard, Modern Warfare 2 2022, Modern Warfare 3 2023, and probably 1,000 more in other franchises. I mean, Halo Reach has Nightfall, so... During the level we are actually talking about today, as you move through the obliterated former city that has a shadow over the lives of people still alive today, players can actually make choices, like leave a helicopter be or climb to a church tower and fire missiles at it until it's destroyed. Something that I was tremendously bad at, if I'm honest. In this title there is also a feature that I have only really seen in the Metro series otherwise, at least that I remember, in the sniper rifle overlay that changes its visuals given how much cover or shade you have, making it more noticeable and off-putting if you're visible, and seemingly disappearing into the corners of the screen when you're in fact camouflaged. It's a cool feature, and given that it's meant to be a gameplay feature taking place in 1996, you would have thought all Call of Duty games taking place after this was made, or made after this point, would be capable of applying this little quality of life improvement. Personally, I haven't seen it in subsequent titles, however let me know if I've just been ignorant and missed it. As the two Brit-bongers move through the desolate, once bustling ex-metropolis, sneaking past major patrols, having small skirmishes, trying to both be unseen and unheard, the audience or players, whoever, will see more scenes of a hauntingly, beautifully recreated destruction, and scenes that feel simultaneously nightmarish and mundane, sadly not having the soul-piercing sound like in Aftermath of the playground, but I think that at that point it would start to seem like Price is schizophrenic. But that would also make an interesting new angle and may have explained some of his actions later on in a more sympathetic light than just in pure war crime loving savagery. Probably would have been a bit of a grating experience on the players though after a certain amount of time. Also, before moving on, I would have liked this level of respect to be given to the destruction done by Western powers throughout the campaign when moving through Afghanistan, instead of this feeling like something that is revered and Afghan land being some kind of explosive playground for America to do whatever it wants. The two soldiers finally make it to the hotel they have been searching for and set themselves up, waiting for Imran Zakhaev's meeting to take place. Their stakeout leaves them in the decimated hotel for 3 days, with their gear and a magically acquired Barrett 50 cal rifle. This rifle is crucial in the idea of assassinating this Russian ultranationalist revolutionary, and in that essence our dear Captain Macmillan tells us to take into account every detail, including a frame of reference that actually would not be a factor: the Coriolis effect. To discuss why this is wrong, I have to go into teacher mode. So the Coriolis effect, according to National Geographic, describes the pattern of deflection or deviation from a straight line of travel, not to be confused with a type of block deflection like in Star Wars, taken by objects not firmly connected to the ground as they travel long distances around the Earth. This would mean it affects large-scale weather patterns such as winds, precipitation, and temperatures, not like tornadoes or disasters specifically, and maybe planes. But in this article by National Geographic, it makes a point that because it is in relation to your position and the rotation speed, and that the Earth rotates on an approximate 1,600 kilometers per hour at the equator, while only being 0.00008 kilometers per hour at the North or South Pole. Using this maths, we can come up with an approximate value for Pripyat, and that's what we'll be using today. Now, this maths is complement of Reddit user Angst on the r/theydidthemath. Honestly, a great place if you want to work out nonsense like this, or if you're making videos like I do and just want to ramble about something incoherent. So I will be allowing a text-to-speech model to speak for me on this one, partly because saying this out loud in my first draft was a nightmare. So here we are.
For this, we need a formula that gives us the speed with which the Earth rotates around its own axis at a specific distance along Earth's surface from the pole. That rotational speed is purely dependent on the distance on a straight line from the Earth's rotational axis. If we imagine a circular cross-section of the Earth with the North Pole on top and the equator in the center, that axis will run vertically straight through the middle. If we also cut through the point we care about, that point will end up somewhere on the circumference of that circle. To figure out where that point is in relation to the axis, we need to figure out its angle relative to the axis, which is apparently fairly straightforward. Earth has a circumference of 14,075 kilometers. Your point, Pripyat, is x from the North Pole, so it's x divided by 14,075 kilometers. We also know that the full way around would be 360 degrees. So to get the angle that our point is away from the angle, we can just take the fraction from above and multiply it by 360 degrees. 360 degrees times x divided by 14,075 kilometers. To get the actual distance from the axis, we can imagine a right-angled triangle that goes from the center of the Earth up the axis until it's level with the point, then at a right angle to the point and back to the center, which means the angle is between the opposite leg, our distance from the axis, and the hypotenuse. We know that the hypotenuse is the radius of the Earth. It goes from the center to a point on the surface, so it's about 6,371 kilometers long. And now we can put all that into the appropriate trig ratio. Sin times alpha equals a divided by h. Sin times 360 degrees times x divided by 40,075 kilometers equals a divided by 6,371 kilometers. A equals sin times 360 degrees times d's divided by 45 kilometers times 6,371 kilometers. Now we know how far our point is from the Earth's axis. The speed with which the Earth rotates at a given point is directly proportional to its distance from the axis. And we know the speed at one other point, the equator. You've already given a rounded value, but let me be a bit more precise with 1,670 kilometers per hour at the equator. If the distance from the axis at the equator is just the radius of Earth, which we've already had above, 6,371 kilometers. So the speed v is v divided by a equals 1,670 kilometers per hour, divided by 6,371 kilometers. Therefore v equals 1,670 kilometers per hour, divided by 6,371 kilometers times a, meaning v equals 1,670 kilometers per hour, divided by 6,371 kilometers, times sin times 360 degrees, times x divided by 40,075 kilometers, times 6,371 kilometers. Ergo v equals 1,670 kilometers per hour, times sin times 360 degrees, times x divided by 40,075 kilometers. Using your distance of x equaling 4,318.08 kilometers, we get v equals 1,670 kilometers per hour, times sin times 360 degrees, times 4,318.08 kilometers, divided by 40,075 kilometers. This would mean that v approximately equals 1,670 kilometers per hour, times sin times 360 degrees, times 0.10775, which translates to v approximately equals 1,670 kilometers per hour, times sin times 38.79 degrees, leading to v approximately being equal to 1,670 kilometers per hour, times r0.626468, leading to this equation meaning that v is approximately equal to 1,046.2 kilometers per hour. With this in mind, and the fact that Zakhaev is 896.7 meters away, according to the mission transcript, the bullet will take 1.05 seconds to arrive at the target, and considering the size of a .50 caliber round, the bullet's speed of approximately 3,074.4 kilometers per hour, and the in 1 second movement of Zakhaev of 1,046,200 divided by 60 equaling distance travelled per second in rotation of the Earth, which would equal 290.611 meters per second. Then we divide this by the distance we have of 896.7 meters. 0.32408962654 or amin. يعني الشارع
So that was a short and possibly the last time I'm ever gonna use an AI in a video. What the hell happened there? I'm not reading that again, but you get the idea. Now when we look at that, yeah, A foot difference in a shot is pretty major when you look at how close some shots have to be. However, to a trained sniper, this would be bordering on negligible, and would have been accounted for in bullet drop or something. As well, there's no evidence that the rotation of the globe affects exactly the direction to move a bullet from prime lobotomizing material to saving half off on all glove purchases. I want to mention as well that this is not really how light you'd get off in this circumstance. If a 50 cal hit you, it would look more like one of these two examples, really.
And the 50 BMG managed to make it through the stone, but the second shot of the 50 BMG did not make it through. I think it hit the iron core and it stopped it.
I've got bone in the tree.
What's your best estimate of this distance?
I would say 18 yards.
He's gonna measure it out. Man, he went out
16,
with
17,
a bang.
18, 19, 20.
20 yards,
20
about
yards.
60 feet.
Oh my god. Look at all that blood.
Dude, killer shot. Oh my gosh.
If anything, the shot missing is more likely some kind of trickster wind god playing around with the bullet and the flags to just throw you off, and nothing to do with actual science. The little addition in this mission of Yuri and Makarov as shown in Modern Warfare 3 of having been at this event and the accompanying achievement is a brilliant ad. Plus the idea of being able to make a time paradox is a fun homage to Metal Gear Solid 3.
Snake, what have you done? You changed the future. You've created a time paradox.
Or just the concept of time. But Metal Gear Solid 3 is a game I have yet to play, so it's a really good reminder. Thanks, Activision, I'll get around to it. Jumping back to the gameplay after botching his one job, Price has to shit the bed and get running as now everyone knows their position. They explode the building and cost either the UK or US taxpayer an additional $8,000 to $10,000 at the very least, with the abandonment and destruction of the 50 cal they just left. Once off that building, the two fight through a number of buildings, just murdering everything, including wild dogs for some reason. As karma for that act against the innocent, irradiated canines, Macmillan has his legs all kinds of messed up by a helicopter rotor, leading to Price literally carrying the whole team, just like I tell myself I do in zombies matches. After lugging Macmillan to the landing zone, you get a wave defense against ultranationalists for far longer than is fun, which is probably why, when these missions are talked about, this bit is always the bit people miss out or don't talk about. It's boring as hell. I wish I could say stuff like this would not continue in the series, but I would be lying if I did. Making back lost time and jumping back to this new mission, Heat, and I want to highlight the little hiccup in the consistency in this game that has never really been resolved. The mission starts at 9:40:28 and is shown to be, allegedly, 8 hours after Al-Assad's death. But if we jump back to the mission safe house, and that begins at 234, now if we somehow went through at the speed of sound, it still would not be fast enough to travel back in time, unless we didn't count for daylight savings time, which honestly would be a hilarious reason, and I hope is true. Team Brit have a defensive line set up and sets off a couple of explosives, picking off enemies that are wanting to recover Al-Assad. We have yet to inform them this is a little superfluous now. The strategy at play is to imply that there are more troops among us than there really are, and when that doesn't seem to scare them off, Soap has to run back and get on a minigun attached to a crashed helicopter. After a little bit of a mow-down throwdown, as I want to call it, Soap has to run back to a house and he sets off some planted explosives that, if they're not all used right now, would be deemed a war crime to leave, as the civilians to live here would die when interacting with them. Soap then has more running to do, all the way back to the farm that we just made our way to before Price went on his old man ramble for an ungodly amount of time. Actually, do you think he has early onset dementia? This is where the team hold off advancing troops, hoping that a helicopter will pick them up where they are and launching some missiles at some tanks. The team are told, actually, the helicopter isn't going to manage to land there. You got to run all the way down the hill again. Because who doesn't love a boring plot contrivance to take a video game level and go, just play it again, but backwards? I have to highlight that literally any gamer has disliked The Last Jedi and Canto Bight, but loved this level, can eat my entire ass. Getting all the way down, we are picked up and we get to see the beginning of a new combined task force, as Griggs is the first to step out of the chopper. What would come to be known as Task Force 141 is starting up. Taking off, we are prepping for our next steps against Zakhaev, and before I get to those, I would like to share something that the starting loadout is just terrible for this mission. It's absolute dog shit. I honestly could not think of a worse one when completing a mission that has to be fall back a bit and then cover somebody else doing the same thing. Honestly, an assault rifle and an LMG would work. Personally, I would be pushing for the G36C and a SAW, or dropping the LMG for a Scorpion Mini Uzi that would fit into this combo really nicely, as this would allow you a bit of precision and a spray and pray option that will get you through closer encounters. With confirmation of the special relationship bringing a USMC and SAS joint operation, everyone is up bright and sprightly to take over an enemy checkpoint at 6:45 in Russia. A great use of your morning, it gets the adrenaline going way better than the gym. Once the team have killed a bunch of guys who were just guarding a checkpoint, and I'm going to be honest with you, when you don't have the swelling score or take a little time off between missions, it feels really overboard and unnecessary. And then we wear their clothes. What next? Wear their skin? Everyone gets into position and they're like a theatre troupe. One of the things I noticed though was, why is Griggs hidden in the tower with me? Why might the idea of a black man being visible ruin the disguise as ultra-nationalists? What did Infinity Ward mean by this? I'm sure that this will be the last time that we have any of these bizarre questions.
Foreshadowing is a literary device in which...
So Vicky's axe, as I want to call him, pulls up at the checkpoint. Our guys try to jump him, there's some calamity, the tower falls down, and there's a chase. Soap and Griggs charge through this small town and get to Vicky and get him to run up a tower block where he's cornered. And while Soap tries to take the gun from Vicky, Robert Bud Dwyer's his way out of an uncomfortable situation. Probably didn't want us finding his goon cave or something. And at this point, we are told by Price that Imran isn't going to take this lying down, and that we've got to move. This is a very short mission that feels like it gives more to the story as you play it, rather than when you talk about it in the abstract. It's kind of fun, it feels like an inverse of the movie Behind Enemy Lines, but there's not a lot that I can discuss on this one critically. As if on cue, roll out Bob Barker, because the Price really was right on this one. Imizax gives a speech threatening us.
Our so-called leaders prostituted us to the West, destroyed our culture, our economies, our honor. Our blood has been spilled on our soil. My blood on their hands. They are the invaders. All US and British forces will leave Russia immediately or suffer the consequences.
Which, let's be honest, if we heard this, at least the first sentence from an Andrew Tate, Trump or Jordan Peterson, we'd honestly not see it as too out of character for them. It's a weird speech to hear and not see reused in the reboot to discuss the rise of ultranationalism in the Western Hemisphere, or mainly EU, UN major players, and those who have imperialized over time, like, I don't know, Russia and the USSR. Jumping ahead, we are now up and running at 6:20 the following day, which to me is absolutely hilarious, because I mean, which neurodivergent said we may need to try and stop Imran as soon as possible, but we've done our one thing for the day, so it's like that's it. Like, When you have an important phone call at 12:30, so you cancel doing anything else with your day before or after. Anyway, here we are nearly an entire 24 hours after the previous mission began. Soap, Chef Gaz, Price, and Griggs drop into the Atlay Mountains. Unfortunately, Griggs is way off course and gets captured by the ultranationalists. The rest of the team have to pinpoint his location and perform an incredible rescue. Upon pulling this off, Griggs grabs his gear and you'll notice something interesting. Griggs is the only one of the team without a silenced weapon. Something that makes very little sense here, and asks more questions, given that he was using an M4 in the previous mission. Is that a weirdly deliberate choice? What did Infinity Ward mean by this? The only black member with the only loud firearm? You can see it being either the American will be loud no matter what, or if the enemy is to fire on anyone, it may as well be the black guy. Both are weird, and it just makes very little sense. After our party finally being filled out again like the blandest Octopath Traveler title, our boys bring down an electrical tower and join with Party 2. With the complete roster of teen colonialism set up, we witness the launch of 2 ICBMs that are to hit the eastern seaboard of the USA, sent by Immy as revenge for his son's mental health concerns not being taken seriously. It's okay, Immy. I was on a waiting list from the NHS for 5 years for an ASD assessment, and it turns out it wasn't even that. You're going to be waiting a while. Jumping to the next level, All In, which takes place probably a maximum of 5 minutes later from where we've just been, our protagonist team is moving through the facility to get to the command center to try and abort the missiles mid-flight, while intel of the abort codes are trying to be found off-screen. Entering the base, we have some of the team equipped with circular saws that are to enter the fences, the pipes that get the player to the lower levels, and potentially some other things, like maybe cutting down a tree or something. There's a number of vehicles to take down which can make the game tricky and feels like some of the older titles, and there are choices you can make that make the fights easier or harder depending on what you choose. There are some little features like the white barrels that you can hit a few times that can make a big oil slick. It doesn't explode, but it's a fun little detail, showing that it's not just red barrels that have anything you should pay attention to. Once the team are down the vents, we enter our next mission, No Fighting in the War Room. The score, and how much you do per mission, in a way, you can guess that we're reaching the end. Starting the mission by crawling through air vents, and surprisingly they avoided reference to Die Hard while they were at it.
If here by now, then bad place be, trouble time for you when he comes.
Dropping out of the vents, the team need to make sure they're not to be fired upon by their own team. With all that cleared up, Colonial United move through the building, dropping Zaki's men left and right. The team hear that Immy Boy is launching the remaining nukes and are given the abort codes just in the nick of time. After Soap uploads the codes given his undisclosed hacker background, this guy is a Mary Sue by the way, the team head to the garages, load into the trucks and head off for the final mission of this story. As the mission game over begins, our heroes blast down the Russian single carriageways like hell itself opened up and is coming from behind them. Battling off trucks and helicopters, the chase gives that adrenaline-pumping badassery, and just when you think all is well, a tanker explodes. Upon regaining consciousness, Soap sees that Griggs is dragging him to cover, emptying his M1911 and suppressing as best he can, and he draws his sword as he's killed by Zakhaev and his 2 closest soldiers walking up the bridge. Price is knocked out, Gaz is executed and others are shot at. All seems lost, until we see Kamarov and the loyalists light the bridge up, distracting Zakhaev just long enough. Price lifts his head, slides Soap his M1911, and the player takes down Zakhaev, finishing the business that was started all the way back 15 years ago. As the dust settles, Price and Soap are taken care of by the loyalists and the credits roll. With that in mind, I want to talk about the mission in a more critical way. So, starting off, I have no idea why your equipment changed when it doesn't for All In, a mission where a bunch of your team change their gear. I mean, you're literally getting in a car. Where's the time to change? My second point is, why is the only M60 in the whole game in the hands of Zakhaev's literal right-hand man? I'm genuinely, truly bewildered by it. After the credits have rolled, we listen to the incredible Griggs rap done by Infinity Ward employee, the same one voicing Griggs. Suddenly we have some radio chatter. We're cutting into a mission. We hear a Leslie Nielsen reference.
We're going deep and we're going hard. Surely you can't be serious. I'm serious. And don't call me Shirley.
And it's all about busting into an aeroplane, taking down terrorists to get to a VIP. There are some fun moments with cabin decompression in this mission. It feels bombastic, cramped, which gives a level of excitement you don't get elsewhere, and the mission ends on a skydiving note. It's not the most narratively intense mission, but it's great fun to switch your brain off and have a good go at. It does contain the reused models from the Crew Expendable mission, with Gaz's model taking the lead, which is interesting, especially given the fact that, well, he'd struggled to put the helmet on, let's say that. Having looked at the whole campaign, I have to say that narratively it's kind of mid. It's not the most brand new idea. It was captivating for the time because we had not seen the atmospheric side to it before this was originally released. There was a few things that I noticed when going through, like the funny death animations that would continue all the way up to, at the very least, Infinite Warfare, and the fact that the G3 and the M16 are fully auto in the campaign when they're not in the multiplayer. One of the best things about the popularity coming from this game was the fact that the FPS genre gained a staple control scheme, which would be then used by so many games. This is something I'm really thankful Bobby Kotick was too distracted trying to snort cocaine off his own penis to trademark it, because it makes the experience a little easier when you try and jump from game to game. In 2007, this was one of the biggest problems of the era, and because of this, I've had to praise Activision and Infinity Ward over BioWare and Monolith for Speech Wheels and Nemesis system trademarks respectively. The heads-up display in this game and user interface are a lot nicer than the reboot system in my eyes, which is strange that we've had such a step back. I also have to say that the score of this game is really good, but that's a little unfair because it's Hans Zimmer, so that's like telling me that a movie has a sexy cast in it because it contains Javier Bardem or Walton Goggins. Hi there, Editing Anna here. So I just want to issue a little bit of an amendment here. Basically, it turns out I got the wrong end of the stick. Given the fact that the sequel has its soundtrack done by Hans Zimmer, I fully believed it was Hans Zimmer this time. So good work, Stephen. That's even better. That's enough. So yeah, I'm leaving it as is because I really liked the joke I put in. I will say it's odd, however, that the plot contains a strange view with the SAS being side by side with the USMC, when I'm pretty sure they're the regular army, aren't they? Why are they side by side with the UK's alleged specialists? It gives a vibe of American exceptionalism that I'm a little tired of in stories nowadays. Having finished the main title, we're now able to have a little look at the intel cheats, which is in this newer version of the Modern Warfare title. It does have a lot of entertainment value, I will give it that, with notable elements such as ultra ragdolls, making it like Half-Life trying to push back war flashbacks with paint thinner. Lemon grenades option giving you the powers of Motojiro Kaji from Bungo Stray Dogs. That's a fun reference for all 4 people, I think, who are going to get that. Melon heads allow for fun new names for the wounded heroes of Price's manic dream worlds. And Ragtime Warfare does the most for these settings changes, as it, on top of giving sepia tones and making it like a silent movie experience, which is a lot of fun and can be very entertaining, you get a callback to the older titles where you couldn't sprint. I'd say it's not recommended for the escape in Pripyat, but you do you. I'm not your mum. I was surprised to see the lobbies of the multiplayer were as full as they were when I played. It was a pleasant surprise though, as the multiplayer was ostensibly the same as it was with the original release. There are some new elements like the addition of certain weapons, there are some character skins you can get, but some more customizations mean you have to have more monetization. That's right, Bobby needs to buy a new Prada wank sock, so there are new in-game purchases that are still active in a game that has been long since abandoned. as is always the way, you're able to unlock some free crates with 1 per match completed, or at least the points you needed can end up that way, and level ups granting you about 2 crates. When leveling up, not only do you get those crates I mentioned earlier, you also receive that kick-ass riff that really does make you want to keep going. It's something that recaptures the teenage edge for me. I know that's not very indie darling, esoteric, manic pixie dream girl of me. I swear I'll get better soon, but I have to give it credit. And I'll say, the multiplayer plays well. It feels smooth and, at least with the original guns in the game, balanced. I'm not a major online and multiplayer girl, so I can't tell you much else. So would I recommend the game? Well, given that I bought it for a tenner about 5 years ago at least, yeah, it's probably worth less than a tenner. But don't go into it looking for something completely new that you've not seen. It's been expanded and innovated on in future titles and other franchises, but some consider this modern video game history, so if you've not tried it and avoided the spoilers of the plot from here and my other videos, I'd say go right ahead. So I wanted to say thank you for watching this video, and if you're liking it, please have a little look down below. There's links to a Patreon, which obviously would help me make more of these videos faster and also know what it is that you like. Liking, commenting, all that kind of a thing. Tells me what games you want to see. And also the Patreon subscribers will be allowed to pitch games that will be in the rotation. Unfortunately, I have a bit of a set system at the moment, so I will be informing people when the next thing you vote on will be, but obviously you'll be getting photos and stuff there. I'll be putting up different versions of videos and stuff that's uncensored and that kind of a thing there, so you know, you can get stuff like that. It'll be a great time, so catch me over there, and catch any of my social media links in the description as well on the link tree. And I'll catch you later.